All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Uh, my name is Brittany Mellinger, and I'm the Director of Fair Housing and Commercial Property at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and you are in our Fair Housing Empower Hour session. Today's topic is Fair Housing and Screening and Access, Law, Data, and Safer Alternatives. So today we are hosting our guest presenter, Vanessa Raymond-Garcia, who's a Senior Policy Analyst at Regional Housing Legal Services. Before I introduce Vanessa and let her do her thing, I'd like to share out a few details. So first off, this session is being recorded, and the recording and the slides and all the materials will be sent out after the program today. I'm going to put a statement in the chat for you about the recording in just a moment. All right. So it is against the law in Pennsylvania to record oral conversations without the permission of the folks involved in most circumstances, and this session is being recorded for training and/or record-keeping purposes. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session. And at any time, if you have a comment or a question, please feel free to place that in the chat, and we'll respond to you as soon as possible. If you would like to ask your question or comment verbally, please note that by doing so, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of your statements recorded as part of this session. All right. So as we get the program started, I want to provide some information about PHRC and our housing work for those of you who aren't familiar with us. So we believe very strongly at PHRC that we all have the right to fair housing in Pennsylvania. And I want to acknowledge that this is not legal advice. This is simply information about our laws. So the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is Pennsylvania's leading civil rights enforcement agency in housing. So we have a two-part mission. We work to enforce Pennsylvania's non-discrimination laws, which include both the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act as well as the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. We also work to promote equal opportunity for everyone in Pennsylvania. So we accept complaints when people believe that they've experienced discrimination, and we also work to proactively provide education, community outreach, and ensure that everyone has equal opportunity. We're focusing on housing today, but under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, that also covers employment, commercial property, public accommodations such as public businesses and services, and primary and secondary education up through high school. Under the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act, there are protections in post-secondary education, such as colleges, trade schools, and technical schools. I want to briefly cover our protected classes in housing. So these are groups of individuals that have protections in housing on the basis of their race, their color, their national origin, ancestry, age 40 and above, familial status, sex, religion, and disability, as well as the use, handling, and training and support animals for disability. For those of you who aren't familiar with the fair housing space, housing discrimination can look like a variety of different acts. It can be anything from discriminatory statements in advertising and conversation, discriminatory inquiries about someone's protected class as they're seeking to buy a home, rent a home, or get a mortgage, steering to a specific neighborhood or a specific floor or area of housing based on someone's protected class, refusal to sell, lease, or finance housing, unfair appraisals and predatory lending terms, discriminating in housing terms and conditions, such as the terms of a lease, or unfair provision of services and facilities, denial of use of the pool or the community room or the laundry facilities, sexual harassment, as well as refusal to provide reasonable accommodations and modifications for individuals with disabilities who need those changes in practices or changes in the physical structure of the property in order to be able to fully use and enjoy their housing. So PHRC works towards both goals of fair housing. Goal number one, ending housing discrimination, making sure that folks aren't kept out of housing because of discriminatory practices and policies like the ones we just discussed, but also working to promote diverse, inclusive communities, which is known as affirmatively furthering fair housing, AFFH for short. And that means that we need to have actual choice, which means that there actually has to have realistic housing opportunities exist. We need to be able to access that housing without discrimination, protected choice, and we need to have enabled choice. That's realistic access to sufficient information regarding options so that any choice is informed. So earlier this year, we put out a white paper. It's called The State of Fair Housing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We updated it from a previous version a few years back. And this looks at the barriers that folks face as they're accessing housing, specifically from a fair housing lens. So looking at how our housing shortfalls and deficiencies impact individuals in protected classes and what actions we can take to expand fair housing opportunities. So a variety of recommendations came out of that, everything from source of income protection, clear definition of discrimination, increased monitoring for issues impacting fair housing choice, implementing effective statewide code enforcement, funding for affordable and middle market housing, as well as advancing housing opportunities through eviction ceiling. So over the course of the next year, we've invited a series of speakers to join us for the Fair Housing and Power Hour series as we explore these various themes and recommendations that we made in this report. So in our January session, we provided an overview of the white paper. In February, we discussed income-based rental housing. But another significant issue that we highlight in this white paper is the challenges in navigating background screenings for rental housing. It's questions that we get from landlords and tenants a lot. So we invited our partner to come in and talk to us about this. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and introduce Vanessa. So Vanessa Raymond-Garcia has multiple years experience in advancing public policy and systemic reform through rigorous research, strategic advocacy, and multi-stakeholder engagement. She designs and leads initiatives that prioritize justice, government accountability, and measurable impact. A skilled policy translator and coalition builder, Vanessa distills complex legal and policy challenges into actionable strategies, bridging gaps between impacted communities, advocates, and legislators. Her approach combines legislative analysis, data-driven storytelling, and participatory policymaking to inform decision-making and drive evidence-based solutions. Specializing in policy drafting, data analysis, program evaluation, and community-centered advocacy, she ensures that marginalized people actively shape the policies that govern their lives. Vanessa is a two-time graduate of Rutgers University, having earned an MPP from the Edward J. Blauenstein School of Planning and Public Policy. You can find her eating her way through Philadelphia's food scene or hanging at a dog park with her senior dog. So welcome, Vanessa. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks, Brittany. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. And of course, thank you to the PHRC for having me today. Again, my name is Vanessa Raymond-Garcia, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst with Regional Housing Legal Services. So today we'll be discussing fair housing and screening and access, how criminal and eviction histories influence housing decisions, what the law requires, and what we can all do to support equitable access. So Regional Housing Legal Services works across Pennsylvania to support communities in creating and preserving safe, affordable housing. We provide legal services, training, policy expertise, and support to organizations serving low-income communities. Our work is grounded in the understanding that many housing barriers are structural. Criminal and eviction histories often reflect the systems people have moved through more than they reflect their current stability. So here's an overview of our agenda. We'll be covering the scale of criminal and eviction histories and statistics, the legal framework, including the Fair Housing Act, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, Clean Slate laws, and disparate impact, how screening practices reinforce inequities. We'll talk about how tenant screening companies operate, discussion of some concrete strategies for tenants, service providers, landlords, and policymakers. And last but not least, resources and next steps, and I'm happy to take questions. So let's start with talking about the scope of the problem, some statistics. So we know that housing is foundational, but criminal and eviction records are incredibly common in the United States. About 1 in 3 adults has a criminal record. Millions have at least one eviction filing. The chart you see illustrates the large number of people incarcerated or supervised on any given day across the United States. The US incarcerates more people per capita than any other democracy, 580 per 100,000 residents, totaling nearly 2 million individuals behind bars at any given time. Even when the underlying issues were resolved years ago, these records can block access to housing for decades. When housing providers use blanket bans on criminal history, they are probably excluding a large portion of the population without considering whether those records are relevant to their tenancy. Now let's talk about the Pennsylvania specific context. So our Commonwealth spends nearly $3 billion, yes, with a B, each year on corrections. This is obviously way too much to be spending on incarceration when we can be using this money to instead support families and communities, including things like more affordable housing and reentry support programs. We have the 5th largest prison population in the nation and the 3rd largest population under probation and parole supervision. Also, too large. Because involvement in the criminal legal system is not evenly distributed, screening policies based on criminal history can disproportionately impact certain communities. I would be remiss if I did not include the mention of the 2024 Supreme Court case, City of Grants Pass versus Johnson, where the Supreme Court ruled that cities may enforce public camping bans even when no shelter beds are available. This underscores the urgency of ensuring stable housing. Being evicted from one's home and living outdoors now increases the risk of incarceration even more, giving our neighbors the potential for having a criminal and eviction case following them in their future housing search. Now let's talk about some eviction statistics. Nationally, approximately 2.7 to 3.6 million households face the threat of eviction annually, with roughly 900,000 households physically evicted, according to data analyzed by the Eviction Lab. According to a 2023 report by the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, which is where this chart comes from, eviction filings in Pennsylvania have bounced back to pre-pandemic levels, meaning 1 in every 14 renter households face the risk of being taken to court by their landlord. This comes out to approximately 310 households facing eviction filings every day across the Commonwealth. It's important to note that a filing is not the same as a judgment, and many filings are withdrawn, dismissed, or settled without establishing wrongdoing. Yet these filings often appear in screening reports for years and result in housing denials. This map shows that while urban counties like Philadelphia and Allegheny have higher total eviction cases, the highest filing rates, or evictions per renter household, are happening more often in lower populated suburban and rural counties. Rural evictions, especially, get less attention but devastate small communities. I'll distinguish between what an eviction filing and an eviction filing rate is because it's important. So eviction filings refer to the total number of eviction cases filed in a specific place and time period. So a county with a large population will naturally have more filings than a small county, even if the small county has a bigger eviction problem proportionally. Eviction filing rates measure how common eviction filings are, given the number of renter households in a community. Filing rates allow apples-to-apples comparisons between places of different sizes. Essentially, eviction filings count how many eviction cases were filed, and eviction filing rates measure how widespread eviction filings are relative to the renter population. I hope that explanation is helpful to better understand this map. With this background, let's talk about the laws that guide housing discrimination protections, such as the Fair Housing Act, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, clean slate laws, and disparate impact. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibits discrimination based on 7 protected characteristics: race, color, religion, sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity, national origin, disability, or familiar status. It applies to almost all housing providers. The ones that aren't included are small landlords with less than 4 properties. Although criminal records are not a protected class, the way landlords use those records can violate the Fair Housing Act if the policies create discriminatory effects. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Act of 1955 prohibits discrimination in more than just housing, in employment, housing, commercial property, education, and public accommodations, where the Fair Housing Act only prohibits discrimination in housing. It's great that our Commonwealth also includes these additional measures of protection. The PHRA also adds additional protections, including people over 40 years old and disability-related assistance animal use. It also covers the small landlords that the federal law does not. One will only need to own one property that houses tenants for this law to apply. This is essential. Even small landlords must comply with these rules. In 2023, Pennsylvania passed what's known as Clean Slate 3.0. Clean Slate automatically seals many older criminal convictions. Summary convictions are sealed after 5 years. Most misdemeanor convictions are sealed after 7 years, and some felony convictions are sealed after 10 years. Once sealed, these records should not appear on screening reports and should not be used to deny housing. Yet, screening companies sometimes report outdated or sealed records anyway. Understanding Clean Slate helps prevent unlawful denials. Now let's talk about disparate impact. So a policy may violate fair housing laws if it's neutral on its face, it disproportionately affects protected groups, and it is not necessary to achieve a legitimate purpose. Criminal and eviction histories are unfortunately not protected classes, but some policies may disproportionately impact the protected classes that we have mentioned. Disparate impact is still good law, despite all of the attacks at the federal level. Under decades of federal and state case law, including the 2015 Supreme Court case, Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs versus Inclusive Communities Project. And it's also still good under the PA Human Relations Act, so these cases can and should still be brought forward. To demonstrate why disparate impact exists, here is some data to demonstrate how protected classes are treated in the justice system. So this is information on Pennsylvania. So the chart you see on the left shows the state's total Black population, the leftmost column, compared to the Black population in the state's jails and prisons. While Black residents make up 13% of the Commonwealth's population, which is the smaller portion, blue portion of the leftmost column, they make up 37% of the jail and almost half, 47%, of the prison population. These are obviously astounding numbers. 55% of people in jail and 57% of people in prison are non-white. And Black residents are 7.7 times more likely to be in prison than white residents. These are, of course, awful statistics. In this map, also by the same report published by the Housing Alliance, and I know it might be a little bit hard to see, but you will be able to get the slides, and you can also take a look at their report at the link. But the percentage over each county represents the percent of Black and Latinx households, and the color gradient represents the eviction filing rate. Nearly half of the counties with the highest eviction filing rates also have a significant Black and Latinx population. So we know from this chart that many Black and Latinx residents are being taken to court at disproportionate levels by their landlords compared to other racial groups. So to sum up, in Pennsylvania, Black and non-white residents experience incarceration and supervision at much higher rates. Black and Latinx renters experience higher eviction filing rates. And something not mentioned by the visuals included is that women, especially single mothers, face higher eviction rates than men. These disparities migrate directly into screening outcomes. Now let's talk about how screening practices can reinforce inequity even when applied uniformly. So why do screening policies matter? Well, criminal and eviction histories reflect systemic disparities. Using these records without context magnifies those disparities. Fair housing laws focus on effects, not just intent. So even well-intentioned policies can lead to discriminatory outcomes. And to talk about where these records fit into applications for housing, criminal and eviction checks often come after income and credit checks, and especially after paying an application fee. And as we know, when looking for housing, this can become expensive very quickly, especially for our neighbors that are carrying these criminal and/or eviction histories. Many applicants often pass every other criteria, but are denied solely due to older or irrelevant records. So let's talk about some fair housing considerations in criminal record screening. Blanket bans on criminal histories are risky and discouraged. Landlords can reduce inequities by focusing only on recent relevant offenses with a demonstrated connection to housing. Excuse me. And policymakers can support equitable access by encouraging, or requiring individualized assessments and ensuring sealed, expunged, or irrelevant records are not used. I have some examples. The first example, say two applicants have the same conviction. One was 19 at the time and has had no legal issues in the 18 years since. The other was convicted 18 months ago. Treating them identically is not evidence-based. Another example, an applicant was arrested during a traffic stop, but the charges were dropped. Because the screening report didn't list the disposition, the landlord treated it as a conviction. This happens pretty frequently and leads to unlawful denials. Now let's talk about eviction record screenings. So eviction filings often do not reflect tenant fault, result from misunderstandings or retaliation, and/or stem from short-term crises. Bans based on eviction histories are also risky and discouraged. Landlords can reduce inequities by focusing only on current rental stability rather than older filings. And policymakers can help improve accuracy and accessibility of court records. A few examples here. A tenant legally withholds rent when heat is not repaired. The landlord files an eviction to pressure them. The tenant wins, but the filing still harms them years later. This is a common occurrence. Another example. Single parent loses childcare, files behind 1 month, and quickly pays back the balance. The case is dismissed, but the filing remains. So some key takeaways on both criminal and eviction histories in screenings. Blanket bans are risky. Records may be inaccurate or incomplete. Individualized assessments are best practice. Tenants can explain their circumstances. Providers can challenge discriminatory results. And landlords and policymakers can make critical systemic changes. Now let's talk a little bit about what the industry looks like. So tenant screening companies compile data from many different sources. Landlords often assume that this information is accurate. Frequently, it is not. A lot of landlords purchase third-party reports compiling credit, criminal, and eviction data. Reports may include risk scores or recommendations that drive accept denial decisions. Lack of transparency makes it hard for renters to correct mistakes. Some common issues include mismatched identities, duplicate records, missing case outcomes, and the reporting of sealed records. An example, two individuals share a common name. The screening company pulls records for both and merges them. The applicant receives a denial based on offenses they never committed. These errors are pretty widespread and can be difficult to correct quickly. So some common problems documented by regulators. There's often inaccurate or incomplete eviction records, sealed, dismissed, or duplicate. Failure to identify third-party data sources. Name-only matching, leading to false criminal hits. Insufficient procedures to ensure maximum possible accuracy under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And one good thing is that the Fair Trade Commission has implemented enforcement measures against major screening providers. So let's talk about algorithmic risk scores. So screening companies increasingly use algorithmic scoring, just like many other places do it at this point. Some companies generate proprietary tenant scores that weigh credit, debt, and court records. Scores can exclude voucher holders or ignore guaranteed subsidies, inflating risk. Courts recognize that Fair Housing Act applies to screening vendors. Disparate impact claims can proceed. A best practice. If scores are used, provide criteria, allow context, and avoid blanket cutoffs. Another example. A voucher holder whose rent is guaranteed is marked high risk because an algorithm weighs credit card debt heavily. The scoring system ignores stabilizing factors like subsidies. Algorithms are not neutral. They can replicate inequities just as easily as human decision-making. Now let's talk about how to respond to screening barriers. Tenants have the right to request the screening report, dispute errors, provide supporting documentation. Service providers can help clients create a rental resume with references, payment information, and explanation of past issues. Individualized assessments reduce legal risk and improve outcomes. Arrests alone are not proof of wrongdoing. Old, irrelevant records do not predict tenancy. Encouraging holistic evaluation benefits both landlords and tenants. Escalating systemic issues to the PHRC, local commissions, legal aid are important, as well as potentially filing complaints with the Fair Trade Commission. When discrimination occurs, tenants can file again with the PHRC, local human relations offices, federal agencies for screening inaccuracies, and service providers can guide tenants through these processes. So here are some strategies for service providers. Providers can educate clients on their rights, request written explanations of denials, work with landlords to adopt fair practices, encourage case-by-case evaluation, distinguish between filings and judgments, emphasize current stability, and help clients prepare explanations and documentation. Some strategies for landlords and policymakers. Landlords can distinguish filings versus judgments, adopt individualized reviews, require screening vendors to correct errors, and delay criminal background checks until conditional approval. Policymakers can support sealing of outdated records, improve court data accuracy, regulate screening companies, and promote fair, evidence-based screening policies. So some resources and next steps. RHLS provides free reviews of landlord screening policies from landlords to ensure that they are Fair Housing Act and Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission compliant. So please reach out to us if any of you are interested in taking advantage of this free resource. Some resources for service providers. Please explore all of these state, local, and nonprofit resources listed here. They include legal aid, housing guides, PHRC contacts, and reentry services. And you'll be able to get the slides, so you'll be able to click through all of these links. So to summarize, landlords and policymakers especially can use fair and transparent criteria, adopt a case-by-case review, rely on accurate data, support sealing and data improvements, and collaborate with fair housing partners. Now we're on to our questions portion of the presentation.
All right, thanks so much, Vanessa. I'd encourage anyone that wants to ask a question to either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and I'm happy to allow you to unmute to ask your question out loud if you'd prefer. And while we're waiting for folks to enter questions, I want to also add a couple additional resources in. I had mentioned our white paper, so I want to put that in the chat for folks that would be interested in taking a look at that. And I also want to highlight an upcoming event that's happening in April. On April 23rd, we'll be hosting our Housing Equality Conference in Philadelphia. Vanessa is going to be a speaker there, and we'd invite anyone to attend. It's a free event that'll be happening at the DoubleTree. And we would invite all of our nonprofit partners, all of our advocates, all of our housing professionals to join us at that event. And yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm seeing a couple questions coming in. How do we contemplate fair housing across state, county, and municipal authority?
That's a good question. And if I'm understanding correctly, working with local partners, other nonprofits, housing providers, especially nonprofit housing providers, county commissioners, your local for housing agency at the municipal level, very similar. Really connecting with as many partners as possible to let folks know that this is an important issue to you, and to go with the next question, at the state level, there are some bills moving through the legislature. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, there is a question in the chat that lists the number of the bill. Reaching out to the legislator that sponsors the bill, letting them know that you support this legislation, um, would go a long way to ensuring fair housing across the state. There are also other bills moving through the legislature at the moment, and if folks have any questions on those additional ones, I don't have the information currently, but you can feel free to shoot me a message. My contact info is here on this last slide.
All right, we've got a question that came in. What happens when a returning citizen that has to register under Megan's Law becomes an issue with a neighbor?
If I remember correctly, Megan's Law can be a difficult issue to overcome. There are some organizations across the state that are working on this issue specifically. If you want to shoot me an email, I can connect you with them. And I believe that there is legislation being considered at the state level as well. I will have to double check that, but feel free to shoot me an email.
All right. I also see a question in the Q&A commenting that a lot of this is focused on the tenant's rights in this process, but if a landlord feels like they have been used in a wrong way by the tenant, where can they go? And can you tell us about where someone can go to get a background check?
Um, I believe if a landlord is having an issue with the tenant, they can contact an attorney. Um, and the background checks, I don't have that information on how landlords can access that, as I'm not a landlord myself. But if you wanted to shoot me an email, we can try and get you to resources that are most in compliance with the Fair Housing Act and as well as state laws.
Great. There's another question about calls from tenants that have landlords that don't make repairs. Is there a resource that they can go to other than legal aid for assistance? Many of these tenants cannot afford to move.
Mm. Um, yeah, I understand that that's a huge problem across the Commonwealth. I, since this question doesn't exactly correspond to the presentation I gave, I can't give you any information offhand, but if you want to shoot me an email, I can try and get you to some other resources that are out there.
All right, there is a comment about the PAE docket. That's a free service to check tenant history and has an app as well. Do you want to comment on that?
I don't have any information about the PAE docket at the moment.
Okay. How do you respond to screening barriers when it's applied to HUD public housing or voucher programs?
Hmm. So under the current federal landscape, things have become a lot harder for people with differing circumstances when it comes to screening barriers. And what we can recommend is going to the state and local resources that are available, as unfortunately HUD's enforcement mechanisms do not exist in the way that they used to prior to 2025. So once we email the slides out, you can feel free to go through that, the specific slide with the state and local, oops, sorry, with state and local resources. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to help where I can.
Great. And there was an additional comment in the chat in regards to the repair question, that code enforcement may be a resource in the local municipality to address
Yes,
repair issues.
that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much.
All right. I am looking for any additional questions. I'm not seeing any additional ones in the chat. Vanessa, do you have any closing thoughts?
Thank you so much for having me today. And oops, if anyone has any follow-up questions that, you might think of later today, during the week, feel free to email me. We're here to be a valuable resource to the Commonwealth. And if there are any landlords that are interested in taking advantage of our free review of their tenant selection plans, we'd be more than happy to work with you to review them.
All right, that's a fantastic resource. Thank you, Vanessa, for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. This was fantastic. And I will be sending out all of the resources, the slides with the links, as well as some additional PHRC materials and the recording following this session. We will be having another Fair Housing and Power Hours session in April, so please keep your eyes out for that flyer as when we announce our next topic and speaker. But thank you, everyone, for your time and attention today, and I hope you have a great afternoon.